Instructions. On the screen, you will see 10 blue words. Each of these blue words has a corresponding red number to its left. That is the assigned number. Place that number in the box that is in front of the appropriate definition for that word. You will have approximately 2 minutes. Our first word on this set is pronounced either patent or patent. Generally in England you hear it more as patent. In the United States you hear it as patent. It has two distinct meanings, but the word origins are quite related. The first meaning is something you're probably familiar with. If you invent something, you get a patent. It's an exclusive right that the government gives you if you invent something. That's a patent. You might see it on a lot of items, patent pending. The second one is something that you'll see more often on standardized tests. It means that it's readily open or easy to notice, easy to observe, very evident. Now, I mentioned that both of these definitions come from the same word. Well, they both come from the Latin patent, which was to stand wide open. When you get a patent, it tells the world, everybody in the world, this belongs to you. It doesn't belong to anybody else. That's how they're related. So you would generally associate this, pair this with the second one down, clear or apparent. Our second word is ossified. If you're a scientist or somebody into archaeology, you probably have no problem with this because of the word root. But ossified means to harden, sometimes harden into bone. As a matter of fact, the root of ossified is os, which was the Latin word for a bone. You have places in the Middle East where they put boxes when you died, they put your bones in them. And the origin of that, the ossifraries were called that because you put bones in them. But it has a more of a metaphorical meaning. When you become like bone, it's you're becoming set and inflexible. Somebody whose mind has ossified doesn't necessarily mean that it's turned to bone, but it means that it's bone-like, it's fixed, it's stuck. So you would pair up ossified with the fifth one down, harden into bone, to become rigid or inflexible in habit. Our next word is vocation. It's not a vacation, it's vocation. A vocation is a particular occupation of somebody. My vocation might be an educator. You can have a vocation in business, in marketing, in teaching. You can have a lot of different vocations. in a more general sense, a strong impulse or an inclination toward any sort of activity. So you see it used a little bit broader than just a employment situation. You should compare that with the word avocation. You notice the avocation is spelled the same except it has an A in front of it. And that sort of means away from. It comes from the ab or the ab in Latin, away from your job. And what do you do away from your job? It's sort of a hobby. So an avocation is something you do for pleasure or as a hobby. Both of these words have the voc in it. The vocare in Latin meant a calling, to call something. We get that in so many words. The VOC or VOIC, vocal, voice. If you evoke something, invoke something, revoke something, voc generally has something to do with calling out something. And your calling, as we say it sometimes, is your job that you do. My calling is religion, or my calling is teaching. It's your vocation. You should pair that up with the fourth one down, one's work or professional calling. Our next word on the list is a parody. Some of you may be familiar with this, but I want to make sure that you do understand it. A parody is usually humorous. I've seen a lot of parodies that weren't, but they're sometimes satire. They're an imitation of a serious piece of literature. More generally, more broadly, a parody can be any humorous or satirical rendition of a person, a play, or an event. You can parody something. It can be used as a verb also. It's from the Greek para, which meant beside. You see para in a lot of things. It usually means beside or next to or parallel to something. And in this case, the ode part comes from the Greek word ode, which meant song. We still use it in one sense. We use the word ode, the ode to so-and-so. It's sort of like a song to us. So a parody is next to the song that we are familiar with. It should be paired up with the ninth one down, a satirical imitation. The next word is presumptuous. It's a unwarranted, maybe an impertinently bold statement or action. In obsolete terms, we don't use it this way. It's a readiness to presume. Notice the word presume is in presumptuous, and you do presume, but you presume too much. We don't use it just simply as the word presume right now. We've taken it to the limit of that, so it's over presuming almost. So presumptuous is really a negative word in most cases. It comes from the Latin pre, which we understand before, and sumere, which meant to take up or suppose something. And we use it in a lot of words too, that sum, consume, and resume, and assume. You take up something. Maybe in this case, the presumptuous action is a little bit too much. So it's generally a negative word. Keep that in mind. It should be paired up with the eighth one down being disrespectfully bold. So it's something that you actually might incorporate it into your own vocabulary. By that I mean incorporate it into your own word usage. All of us have certain word patterns. You don't even notice those patterns until you have to listen to yourself endlessly. There's certain patterns that I have that I just really hate, but I've stopped even trying to change those patterns. It's very difficult to do. And there's certain words that you use over and over again. They're very irritating that you can't seem to stop using those words. But there's certain words that are good, that are a little bit more sophisticated and actually say more clearly what you mean to say. One of the nice things about going over these vocabulary lists is that you can learn to incorporate some of these words into your own usage. This is not to say that you should just use big words for the sake of using big words. English is an interesting thing. We need certain words to be more precise in how we mean a certain thing. Try to incorporate some of these words into your own usage. The way to do that is actually artificially start using them one day, and then slowly you might actually incorporate them into everyday usage. A good example of incorporating something into your everyday usage is the word miscreant. I like it. It's a fun word to use. It's such a nasty word, but it's very valuable. A miscreant is somebody who's depraved, maybe a villain, somebody who does bad things. And the root of it, obviously, is the mis, which is obviously a negative word, can't, and creant, which is eventually from the Latin credo, which meant to believe. And to this day, when your mother or father or somebody else, your boss, is yelling at you and they say, "Oh, you're unbelievable," they're basically saying you're being a very bad person. So a miscreant is somebody who is really, really a rotten person, and it's a lot better to say you're a miscreant than you're a bad person. It sounds better. Anyway, that should be matched up with the 6 1 down, depraved, villainous, or base. Our next word is pronounced licentious, not licentious, and it means, in a broad sense, unrestrained, lascivious, libertine, lewd. It sometimes has sexual overtones, not always. More broadly, licentious generally just means going beyond your customary or proper bounds and limits, sort of disregarding rules. So it's sort of weird, the word licentious is very close to the word license, and you sort of think, well, they're the opposite. Not really. In Latin, the word licit, which we get license from, is a word that they use to say it is allowed, it's permitted, and you have the freedom to do something. And if you think about it, when you get a driver's license, it's allowed to drive. You're free to drive to do it. If you act too free or too unrestrained, you overdo your rules, you are licentious. So one's a good thing, I suppose, getting a license. The other thing is a bad thing. It should be paired up with the 3rd one down, immoral, lawless, or lewd. Forsake means to quit or leave entirely, abandon or desert. It's usually in the sense of I forsook my job, or I was forsaken by my girlfriend, or something of that sort. It's very personal in that. In a more general sense, it just means to give up or to renounce. Anytime a word starts off with for, it's probably of an Old English Germanic background, and the word sake in Old English and today meant purpose, for the sake of it, for the purpose of it. And it should be paired up with the 7th one down, to abandon or to forget. Forsake is not so hard, but you really need to think about what it means on some of these tests. Our penultimate word, penultimate, by the way, is a fancy word for next to the last, is obfuscate. And it means to confuse. Notice the fuse part in both of it. And bewilder or to stupefy. It also means to make obscure or unclear. Notice the part there. We'll talk about that. Generally, which sometimes means over, is an intensifier, but it means over something, and fuscare meant to make dark, make it difficult. So we get a lot of words that start with that are just intense words. Notice that, and that's a very useful thing to keep in mind with these sort of difficult words, and also sort of to interpret their meaning. So think of the word obsessed, obnoxious, obligation, obsequious, obsolete. These are all very intense words, and part of that is the intensifying effect of that prefix of. So obfuscate just means to confuse, to make wilder. You should pair that up with the first definition on the top, to confuse, bewilder, or to stupefy. And I've saved the favorite word for last, ubiquitous. It's a word that is very, very useful. It means exist everywhere, being everywhere. You might say God is ubiquitous, or pain is ubiquitous. It's from the Latin, the I part meant a place or location, and the QUE part is switched to QUI, meant any or also. It means any place, everywhere. So we get it from that. It's a interesting thing. You might say standardized test or ubiquitous. It should be paired with the very last one, the 10th one down, existing everywhere or widespread.